Hey guys, Taki here. 2023 is shaping up to be the year of the handheld clones, and this guy is no exception. In this video, we're going to take a look at the XU10, which draws heavy inspiration from another handheld that launched not that long ago. Let's kick things off with some impressions of the XU10. Right away, we can see that this thing is heavily inspired by the RG353V. We'll look at that in just a second, but I want to go over the layout and all of the controls that we have, because there are some differences here. On the front of the device, we have a 3.5-inch 480p panel, and this is the same one that's used in a lot of devices. If we go under that, we have something that we haven't seen before. We have a D-pad that looks heavily inspired by PlayStation, and so far it does seem pretty good, but we'll have to take a look at how it operates in games later on. Near that, we have start and select with a single mono speaker below, and then we have a big set of ABXY buttons, but oddly enough, they went with a different layout than we usually see on these devices. Typically, you will see BA, YX, but they have flipped that for some strange reason. That just leaves us with the bottom with two recessed analog sticks, and these have L3 and R3 functionality. On the left side of the XU10, we have an SD card slot on the bottom with volume buttons on the top. And on the right side, we have another SD card slot, an LED indicator light, a menu button that's labeled as G, and a headphone jack. There's nothing on the bottom of the XU10, but we do have a few things on the top. We have two USB Type-C ports. One of them is for charging, and the other one is an OTG port. On the back, we have a ridge design where the battery will go, followed by 4 shoulder buttons, and these use micro switches that are a little clicky, but not too loud. Above that, we have a cutaway that is probably above the SoC, and then we have 2 buttons up here on the corner. This is kind of strange. One of these is a power button, and the other one is a reset switch. Now, when it comes to the XU10, this isn't an exact copy of the RG353V, but it does seem like it was heavily inspired by it. We have what seems to be an arbitrary change from the normal D-pad on the right to the one that we've not seen before on the left. The ABXY buttons are largely the same, but again, they did change the layout to what would be an Xbox layout versus the more widely used Nintendo layout. They scrapped the function button on the middle, but they have kept the start and select, and they have changed the position of the speaker to the middle of the device. The bottom is pretty much the same, but they did make one change that might be beneficial. They have the analog sticks slightly pushed towards the center, whereas in the RG353V, they are almost exactly underneath the center of the D-pad and the ABXY buttons. Whether or not that makes any improvement in terms of ergonomics, we'll have to wait until later on in the video. When it comes to the back, there's not a whole lot that's different here, but they do have that cutaway over the SoC, and that will hopefully help with heat because this guy can get a bit warm when you're playing demanding games. Let's now take a look at the software on this. And again, the power button is on the back, so turning this on is a bit awkward, but we're going to press that button on the right side. And then we're going to be greeted with this boot up sequence. This has a rather insane boot sequence that's very loud, and there doesn't seem to be a good way to disable this. You can see now that I put the volume at 50% or 58%. I'm going to reboot this and show you that it will just ignore that and go back to the higher volume. I don't know who thought this was a good idea. This is way too loud to have to experience every time you turn this device on. Anyway, now that we're in the system, we can start taking a look at the software. And the first thing that we're greeted with is this Pandora's box layout. If you've ever used any of those arcade boards, then something like this is going to be pretty familiar to you because a lot of companies will design systems that use a layout that's very similar to this. If you look at the top, you can see that we're in the PSP section, and we have a lot of games here. And if we look over here on the right side, we have the box art and some controls. If we want to navigate to a different system, all we have to do is use left or right on the D-pad, and you can see that there are a lot of games in some of this. For example, with Game Boy Advance, I have over 1,000 ROMs, and these were all included with the 64 gigabyte card that came with my device. I haven't added anything to this at all. But yeah, we're able to see that some of these systems have a ton of games, and if we go over a bit more, we can see that they even have some ports. Here's a port of Shredder's Revenge, and we'll take a look at that later on when we're going over the gameplay performance of this. So I think the vibe that they're going for here is a plug and play experience, but it does have some quirks to it, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. If we press start or select, nothing happens on this. So let's go ahead and press that menu button on the side, and that will pop us out into the settings. In here, we can see that we are running this on an emulation station system. I don't know what the basis for this is, but I could probably guess that it's based on something that was used for the RGE series of devices. If we go into emulator options, we have a few things that are available to us when it comes to Game Boy Color, but we're going to back out for now. We can map our controls. We can change the UI mode, but we Can't really do a lot of things here, like set a different theme, for example. In the game collection section, we can see that we have 38 systems already selected, and if we want to enable or disable any of these, we can do so with ease. We also have language settings, but the thing that I'm interested in are the system settings. In here, the only thing that we have available to us is brightness, and this is set at 50 by default, but I'm going to increase this all the way up to 100 so that way we can see what this panel can do. So the first thing that I'm taking away from this is that this is a really locked down system compared to other devices that are in this form factor or run systems that are similar to this. That's not a problem if everything was done well. So let's go into a system and see if the system behaves how I would expect it to. We're going to go down and select a game, and then we're going to press the A button to launch it, and then A again to start a new game. And here we are with the game booted up, and we can see that it's taking up the full screen. The image does seem to be a bit softer, so they probably have bilinear filtering turned on by default, but we'll take a look at that in just a second. If I put this closer to the camera, you can see that they definitely have bilinear filtering on here because the image looks slightly blurry to get rid of those harsh pixels. Anyway, we have the game booted up, so let's go ahead and see if everything is correct. The D-pad works. The analog stick works. The button for jump doesn't seem to be working right now. It appears to be mapped to B, which again would be in this position if they followed the same layout of the device that they cloned. And the Y button is also the button that would be mapped to this position. So this entire thing is wrong right now when it comes to Super Nintendo. Let's see if we can fix this. Let's press that menu button again. And we can see that we are definitely in RetroArch right now, but we don't have the ability to see most of the menu. It seems like we're locked in here. And if I press the B button, we aren't able to back out into the main menu. But in here, we are able to go down to controls and then to port 1 controls. And I can try to go in here and fix the mistake that they made with mapping this. So that would mean that the A button should be B, the B button should be A, whatever this S key is should be X, and then this one should be Y. And this is already set up as a core remap, so all I have to do is back out and then see if that fixes things. And now the controls are fixed. So let's go back into that menu again. I'm gonna see if it's possible to back out into the main menu by just like spamming the B button on stuff. Okay, there we go. I was able to get out into the main menu, but it's kind of difficult to navigate around with things here. This is really awkward to use without being able to see the menu. Now we're in the video section. I'm gonna go down and they do have bilinear filtering turned on. I'm going to turn that off, and I can see that it is off now. If the mapping for this was broken, I have a feeling that it's probably broken for other things, so I'm going to try out another system and see if they are mapped incorrectly, because this does seem to be kind of like a copy and paste software solution going on here. So we're going to exit this game, and that's going to bring us back out into that main UI again. And this time I'm going to play Super Mario Bros, but I do have an interesting tidbit for you. Usually you won't see any Super Mario games on these kinds of devices, and this is a recent development. From what I've heard, Nintendo has started to sue companies in China for IP violation, and a couple of people have gone to jail, believe it or not. And the companies that make these devices have gone ahead and just deleted Super Mario games so that way they don't have to deal with that. So have you ever been wondering why like a Powkiddy device or an Embernick device doesn't have Mario games when you buy it? That's the reason. They're trying to avoid being sued. But these guys are rolling the dice. But yeah, we have Mario loaded up, and this button is where it should be. And the button for run also appears to be where it should be. So maybe Super Nintendo was the only one that was broken. Anyway, I'm not a fan of how locked down this software is, so I'm going to try to fix some of this stuff off screen, and then we can continue on with the next section of this. I have the stock SD card over here, and I have another 64 gigabyte card ready to insert in the device, and you will be able to see the changes that I've made after I boot this up. The first thing that you're going to notice is we don't have that really annoying boot sequence, and we're able to start right up into RetroArch, and nothing is locked for us. We have full access to everything, and this was pretty easy. All I needed to do is change to the X and B layout, which wasn't like destroyed beyond belief like the other one was. Inside this menu, I can load any of the cores that I need, and I can launch any of the files that are on that SD card without having to use that main UI, but we do still have a main UI. I'm going to go ahead and quit RetroArch so that way we can see what I've changed. If you have used a Just Enough Linux device, then this is going to seem very familiar to you. I just went ahead and took the Artbox Next theme and I added it to this. And I also made it so that way we can see the main system view without being locked into the games list view. I don't really like navigating when I can't see the systems that are on the left and the right side of the one that I'm currently on. There are still some quirks to this. If I go into the Game Boy Color system, I'm not able to back out into that system view, and I didn't have enough time to try to figure out why that is. I think that's because the button isn't mapped right now to have that functionality, but if you have any suggestions, you can leave those down below. This is a lot better than it was before, but it would be nice to have no restrictions at all. I wanted to do a screen comparison in this video against a couple of other devices that also use a 3.5-inch panel. This guy was blurry even after disabling that bilinear filtering, and I found out that it also had a forced shader applied that also blurred out the image, so I had to disable that as well. Now these all have no filtering and no shaders applied, so we can examine how they perform. In terms of color accuracy, I think these two are better than the XU10. The RG353V and the R35S appear to be using the same panel, but the panel that's in the R35S goes a bit brighter than the RG353V. From the entire bunch, this one is my favorite, but I think if you didn't have any other ones to compare to, then you wouldn't think that the XU10 looks bad. Well, I can now say that I have seen it all. I was not expecting the controls on this to be as good as they are. This is probably going to be a controversial opinion, but I think this D-pad is easily in the top 3 best D-pads that I've ever used on any handheld that I've ever reviewed for this channel. It is way better than I thought it was going to be when I first saw the renders of this device. I started out with my usual test of just trying to fire off some Akuma moves, and I was surprised that like every single one of them works like first try with no effort. Usually there's like a period of time where I have to get used to the D-pad before I can start doing combos correctly, but like the first time I pressed anything on this, I was able to do all of the combos without any mistakes. Just look at this. If you like fighting games, this is easily one of the best handhelds that I've ever used for fighting games. Talk about a saving feature, because this thing was not really that special before I found out that the controls were this good. Before we go into the performance section, let's go over the specs. The XU10 comes with the RK3326S processor. This has 4 835 cores clocked at up to 1.6 GHz, and it has a Mali G31 GPU. We have 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM, 64 GB of SD card storage, a 3.5-inch 480p display, and a 3000 mAh battery. Originally, I wasn't planning to do a big section on performance since we've looked at this processor plenty of times before, but it does seem to be a bit different than the normal RK3326 processor. On the left and the right side, we have the RG351V and the R35S with the RK3326 processor. In the center, we have the XU10 with the RK3326S processor. All of these are running the same game with the same emulator core. This is Super Mario World 2, and we're using the SNES 9X current core. As you can see on the RG351V and the R35S, we cannot run this game at 60 FPS in this setting with this core. The RG351V is a bit slower than the R35S, but even the R35S is not hitting 60 FPS in this setting with this core. In fact, as we run around on this bottom floor here, we can see that the FPS will drop down to about 57 FPS. If we use the RG351V, it is even worse. If we do that same thing on the XU10, we are at a steady 60 FPS, give or take, throughout this entire bottom area. So we do seem to have more performance than the normal RK3326 processor, but I don't know how many other instances you would see a difference like this. I don't really feel like trying to find out more instances like this, so I'm just going to take this as a normal performance section, but I'm going to skip over some of the easier things. Now we're going to go into the gaming performance, and we're going to skip over a lot of the lower end emulation platforms because those are all going to run no problem on this chip. As I mentioned, we do have one port on this device, and it just seems to be a copy and paste of another system. This isn't anything to write home about, but it is pretty cool to see it running on this device. Our next section is Super Nintendo, and again we're using the SNES 9X current core. You would usually use a lower end core for this system on this hardware, but we can use this and play any of the games on this platform. Our next system is PlayStation 1, and for this we're using PCSX rearmed with the enhanced resolution turned on. With this option, we can run any PS1 game that we want with no issues. Our next system is Dreamcast, and for this we're going to use RetroRun to run a standalone version of Flycast. This processor isn't that great for the full library of Dreamcast games, but they do have a lot included in the base image that can run.
Move it! Just me! Ah! Yeah! Oh! Ow!
Attention all units. Suspect seen heading south. Block all major roads and capture the suspect.
Here we go.
PSP is our next section, and again, this processor is not that great for PlayStation Portable, but they do have a lot of games here. A lot of the games that are included with the 64GB SD card are going to be lighter games, but they do have a decent selection.
You win.
Nintendo 64 is the last system that we're going to look at in this video, and they've included a ton of ROM hacks in the library of games that they have on this 64GB SD card. Usually these ROM hacks are going to be of games that already run decently on this processor, but they do have some interesting ones to take a look at. Let's now go over my pros and cons of the XU10. On the pro side, there are a few things that I like about this handheld. The best thing about it are the controls. They are great, and they easily beat out other handhelds in the sub $100 price range. With those controls, we also have good ergonomics, a good screen, a decent selection of ROMs included with the 64GB card, and good performance for those games. On the con side, the biggest thing that I don't like is how locked down the software is. I get where they were coming from in trying to make it a plug-and-play experience, but there are better ways of doing this with the OS that this was built on instead of trying to make it impossible for the end user to change things. I could also say that the price is a bit of a con. At $70 retail, I would have liked to see this go for around $60 max to better compete with other RK3326 handhelds. $70 is getting too close to the RK3566, which can do everything that this can do and more. It's also a bit unfortunate that they didn't just go with the RK3566 in this handheld, since it would have only increased the cost by a couple of dollars. But that's going to wrap up things for this video on the XU10. This is a much better handheld than I thought it was going to be when I first learned about it. The controls definitely did a lot to save this thing, but I think a lot of the curation that went into this makes it a better product than you usually see from companies that make these kinds of devices. You can find links to this guy down in the description box below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another, take a look at a video that I did on the TrimUI Smart Pro. It's another new device that's a bit more powerful than this one. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.